always interesting and always lively, and I sometimes too get frustrated with people in what we call the left progressive movement, primarily because there's so much to do with so little time and so many meetings. I get so incessantly tired of meetings. I don't know about the rest of you, but I left the PTA many years ago because there was a half-an-hour discussion on a paper dish or a glass dish for a tuna casserole for a sick teacher. And I thought, I'll bring the freaking dish. I don't care, just stop. And I get that sense of feeling sometimes with this movement. And I also want to, I know Danny knows this, I know we all know this, but for many of us who have struggled with deep economic depression in our own lives, it would be a luxury to lose savings. It would be a luxury to even have to think about a mortgage. It would be a luxury. And there's a huge percentage of people who sit on the very precipice of very, very aggressive poverty every day in this country. And for them, the Migo syndrome is all the time because nobody's talking at that level where you're taking payday loans and you're floating checks and I mean, it's an ugly life. It's an ugly life when you're at that spot. So anyway, I want to introduce to you a man who's going to talk about food, not bombs, which is something that's incredibly important in this world. Keith, you can choose to be here or there, wherever you like.
Well, thanks for coming and having an interest in homelessness and the economic depression that millions of people are already living in. And anyway, I'm Keith, and I helped start Food Not Bombs in 1980. And I've been homeless 3 times since I started Food Not Bombs and once before I started Food Not Bombs. And I'm usually on the verge of homelessness at most times. And so this is not unusual. In fact, I spent the last penny I had to get here. And so hopefully some more money will come. Anyway, so also my brother was homeless for 25 years in Washington, D.C. and Cape Cod areas. And in each of the cases, the first time I became homeless, I had gotten hepatitis from eating in an Italian restaurant in Harlem. And I worked as a manager of budget rent-a-car in Boston. And one day I just did not wake up, and I was deathly ill. Eventually, after my roommates walked me to a hospital, St. Elizabeth's, I was diagnosed with hepatitis, and all my roommates had to get shots as a result. And they immediately asked me to leave. And when I returned to my job, I did not have that job anymore. So I lived on the streets of Boston in the winter with snow up to my knees. At one point, I attempted to rob a McDonald's, but when I got to the woman who was blonde, young high school girl, I just could not threaten to shoot her with a non-existent gun, so I ordered a milkshake, which I couldn't pay for. In a more recent homeless excursion, I had owned a house. I bought a house in Tucson, Arizona. I ended up getting valley fever and fibromyalgia as a result. And within a short amount of time, lost that house and ended up living on the streets in Tucson. So so for almost 28 years now, I've been feeding homeless people, and I have tons of homeless friends. I've been immersed in the homeless community like full time for that, for nearly 3 decades. And many of my friends have shared the same stories, that they were homeowners, and one person I was worked with had been an executive of an oil company, and people frequently, because of either healthcare calamity, that's probably one of the main reasons that people end up living on the streets of the United States. The National Coalition on Homelessness recently put out a report that there are 700,000 homeless Americans. This statistic has been repeated for like about 10 years now. And I find that pretty difficult to believe that the number of homeless people hasn't increased. And certainly, that's not what we are seeing as people that are intentionally worked in part with the homeless community because it is such a growing population in the United States. It's obviously people that need free food. And also we provide a lot of information and education to the homeless community and have been accused by law enforcement of actually encouraging homeless people to believe that they have civil rights. And there's actually been some reports that as a result of food not bombs, people are refusing to just cooperatively go off to jail or to leave the area or leave the town, and are starting to talk back and argue that they have civil rights and that they just aren't as malleable as they had once been, and they attribute that to our close association with the homeless community. So we share free food with hungry people in about 500 cities in the United States, and we possibly more than that, and also we provide free food to a growing homeless population in Europe and another several hundred communities in Europe, and also homeless people throughout Asia, in Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, China, Thailand, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, many countries in Europe, and of course the issue of homelessness in Africa is quite a different situation, but there is certainly a lot of marginal people, lots of people living, many people to a room, things like that. The poverty, of course, is well known about Africa, and we provide food to people living there. Now, we also were the people that coordinated the food relief effort for Katrina. And what we discovered when we got to New Orleans 2 days, we tried to get to New Orleans on the second day after Katrina, and we were told by the military you couldn't go in there, and we had to organize this system of, I wrote a letter giving ourselves permission to go in there. I emailed PDFs of that to all the drivers, who then could pick their letter up at the Kinko's in Baton Rouge and then go in. And the cops were like, fine, the military was okay with that situation. But we got the Red Cross gave out our 800 number as the official number for food, and they collected $1.5 billion. We actually raised $10,000 and were able to handle the crisis for 8 months full time. And we still have, of course, the New Orleans Food Not Bombs, the Baton Rouge Food Not Bombs, the Waveland. We still have groups in every community there. And our idea is that we aren't really the people that are non-homeless, and then we come in and we provide food to the homeless. We are actually the homeless in many cases. So approximately a third to a half of each of our chapters is made up of the actual people that we feed. And the purpose of the reason of that is that is manyfold, but one of the outcomes is that we actually, each group is autonomous, independent, makes its own decisions by a process called consensus, and that process of consensus helps to make it possible for homeless people that are normally invisible, disempowered, to actually participate as an equal person in our organization. And that actual ability to when you have a proposal, even though you live on the streets, and everybody in the group takes that proposal seriously, debates it, and then comes to an agreement as to whether to go forward on that or modifies it with the help of the other people living on the streets that are actually participating in the meeting, as well as the non-homeless people that are participating in the meetings. The sense of empowerment and respect that one gets because their opinions are taken seriously, and that there's no judgment about that, and that they can actually see a positive motion of their participation in the organization. And the outcome is actually, people actually do what it is that's decided on that may be proposed by a person on the streets, or maybe, and definitely that idea came from the streets, and they see it become a reality. That is so empowering and so important. And I remember there was several homeless couple in San Francisco started participating in a tent city protest that happened there in the 80s. And basically police were, homelessness is a criminalized situation. It's illegal to be homeless in many parts of the United States. You can go to jail for up to a year just for the crime of not having a home. That's like a not too uncommon situation, particularly in states like Florida. It's often a municipal law, sometimes there's state laws. It's really common to be a homeless person that comes in and out of jail. That doesn't make getting the house any easier. Many of this 3.5 million families that are going to be foreclosed on possibly in this new crisis are themselves first going to go to an apartment, then to a hotel, then to the streets. You know, this crisis is really, really growing. And we just happen to have a Food Not Bombs gathering in Nashville to discuss this around what to deal with the new, what we're calling the really, really Great Depression. And the issue is that we already are running out of food. There's $100 billion worth of food being thrown out in the United States every year. That's edible food from warehouses and bakeries and manufacturers. This isn't restaurant food. This is like way before grocery stores and restaurants. That food is already under stress by the amount of homeless people in the United States needing this food. It's like huge. So then we decided at our gathering, because we are all experienced this in the 500 cities that we operate in, that we need to start growing food. And we also realized that because when Katrina happened, there was a young man that stood in front of the Superdome in New Orleans on the second day. He was on CNN and a bunch of TV stations. He said, look, you know, we don't have Red Cross, we don't have FEMA, what we need is Food Not Bombs. And literally the phone rang off the hook. Minutes after that, with people saying they saw that on TV and thought that they were supposed to call Food Not Bombs, and so you know, we don't know what the guy was even referring to, but for some reason people knew that we were the people that were going to organize to actually deal with the crisis of Katrina. And now, as Danny's saying, we're having like a huge global Katrina, where food prices have increased 70% in the last 2 months. Rice prices went up 70% just in April alone, causing another additional 800,000, it's 800, maybe even 800 million. It's a huge number of people have slid already into poverty because they had to spend all their money on rice and couldn't, you know, because that's so many people in the world depend on rice. So this crisis is really looming. And so at our gathering, we start talking, okay, we need to be organizing in each of our communities to step up our food programs to be, instead of just like 1 day a week in some cities, to start to really be 7 days a week. That we need to start more organizations in more neighborhoods. And because we are anticipating that average Americans, because they see us every day on the street standing out with food, are going to do like what happened with Katrina. They're going to start to approach us for solutions. And part of those solutions is definitely increased growing of food. And so we have a program called Food Not Bombs. And this is something that like many homeless people are excited about. It's another kind of thing to be doing. And essentially, it looks like the way American society is going to be going is there's going to be this huge millions and millions of Americans that are then just living by doing things like gathering food, growing food, organizing free markets, just trying to like organize in harmony with each other to participate in creating this society that they can actually survive in under the current crisis. So it does seem to me personally that the economic depression is going to shock a lot of people, that it's currently happening and that it's on its way to being really quite shocking, and that we need to have the kind of skills necessary to survive in a situation where we're actually able to get down to basics like fresh water. I mean, homeless people, fresh water is not some kind of thing. You often have to go pay money to go into a fast food restaurant so that you can get the glass of water. I mean, it's not like there's water everywhere. We take that for granted. But a homeless person can't just go get water. And we just, homeless people just can't get food. There's a whole like organizing strategy that has to happen just to survive in America as a homeless person. Whereas if you're in other countries, you can get water and you can get food. Even in like much poorer third world countries, in some cases, it's easier to acquire basic necessities. And so I think the homeless community in America has a lot to teach the not yet homeless community about how to survive under these conditions, because they are going to be welcoming us to, everybody to the streets in a huge way. And so I think that, I really encourage people to actually develop serious relationships with the homeless people in their community, because they are the people that will be able to teach us how to survive the current crash of the economy. And already there's like millions of homeless because he was a strong man. They want a strong man. People, they identify. That's what they see, Fox TV. That's, I mean, it's, the homeless community is America. It's middle America. None of these homeless, you know, I've never met a homeless person who didn't think they were middle class. You know, they assumed they're middle class. They were middle class. Their whole culture is middle class. They were all workers. Many, I'd say it's believed to be almost 2/3 of all homeless people work full time. You know, so this is like not uncommon. There's a huge homeless population that just couch surfs. And as Danny and others have been saying, that group was going to end up being forced onto the street because their landlords are going to be foreclosing on their properties. And I started a program called Homes Not Jails in the 80s in San Francisco. And what happened, that was the savings and loan scandal. And we determined, we would ride our bicycles around the city of San Francisco and write the addresses of every abandoned house. We'd go to City Hall, find out who owned those houses. If those houses were actually in legal dispute between two banks over mortgages, and there was no actual human, person owning that house, we would then put our own locks on that house. And then what we would do, we had like this huge wall in our office with keys and addresses. We had 400 keys, 400 houses in San Francisco. And so then what we would do is at dinner, we would go to the people, usually we try to find families, women and children that were eating with us, and we'd say, would you like a house? And they'd go, yeah, that sounds really good. And so then what we would do is say, meet us tomorrow at 9 o'clock at this address, and we'll give you a house. And so they were already waiting for us when we get there at 9. We would come with a hard hat, with tool belts, with ladders, buckets of paints, and with the key to the door. We let the family in, we start painting the outside of the house, we'd start fixing it up, we'd turn on the electricity for them, we'd turn on the water for them, and the neighbors said, wow, family, they fixed up that old building. And according to the book No Trespassing, we had over 200 houses, we housed families in 200 houses during that campaign, and we're still doing it today, it's just not quite as big as today. And that's with a really tight housing market in San Francisco. So our most recent plan is to start moving people back into houses. So as soon as people are evicted from their houses, whether they're renting or they are, particularly if it's a mortgage foreclosure and they're being forced out, we wait a day so the sheriff's department leaves, and then we just move the family back in with all their property. Because the banks are too overwhelmed. With that many foreclosures, there's no sense in not putting families back into their homes. And so that's our current kind of spin on the current mortgage and homeless crisis, because the more people that we can get off the streets, the better. And that's certainly one way to do it. So every Food Not Bomb chapter all around America, we basically are trying to talk to people who are facing foreclosure, and if they can't be saved and they get forced out, the sheriff does come. And we say, just leave your furniture in front of the house for a couple of days. The sheriff's department will have to go evict somebody else soon enough. They won't be around, and we'll just go right back in and put your family in there until you get found out. Which could actually take up to 2 or 3 years sometimes before banks learn that somebody else is living in the house, because they can't be sold, because there's a horrible housing market. So anyway, I'm going to talk in much more detail about these things tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Russell's 033, and there's many more stories of nonviolent direct action to deal directly with these kinds of crises. And part of our thing is when we're on the streets, we're not only just giving away free food. We don't think of ourselves as a charity. We are a revolutionary organization with the express purpose of changing society to be a non-hierarchical, egalitarian, nonviolent community that actually provides for its own self. And we're basically sliding a new society under the collapsing past society, and it's growing really, really rapidly. We just in the last week we discovered we had a Food Not Bombs chapter in Alice Springs, Australia. It's an Aboriginal organization that airs rock, that serves free food every Sunday at Newman Park, and we have such things happening all over the world. And the other things we do are Bikes Not Bombs, Homes Not Jails, Indie Media. We started this thing called Indie Media in '95. We do October 22nd, No Police Brutality Day. We helped start. is a massive thing we're trying to do to grow food to deal with the current crisis. And so there's actually, and this is mostly college kids, and it's like thousands and thousands of people. And it's something, of course, the media has not, I'm sure none of you have heard that we fed Katrina, yet we were, according to the emergency management agencies that I talk to every single day in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the City Council of New Orleans, the only daily food program in the South, in the area hit by Katrina, during that whole time. So there's many, many other things like Camp Casey, we provide food for that. We've provided food for the Orange Revolution in Kiev. We fed a 600-day farm workers action in Sarajevo. We organized animal rescue shelters in 24 cities of Slovakia. We just won the Human Rights Award in Malaysia. So it's like there's this huge cool thing happening underground, and everybody's certainly invited to join it. And if you want to find a Food Not Bombs group in your town, just go up to a person who looks like they're homeless and ask them where it is, and they'll point you right to where we're serving. Thank you very much for your time.
So there are people doing lots of stuff. The next speaker, she gets an A+ for patience. We're sitting up in front of this group of really dynamic folks who are doing so much and have so much for us all to learn from. Karina works New River Community Action and Virginia Association of Housing Counselors. And before you all arrived in the room, I was sharing with her a little bit of the frustration you feel as a person without somewhere to go and to meet up with somebody in her line of work. And oftentimes they are the first defense for us. They're the first shoulder. They're the first person who hears the trauma, the anger, the rage, the frustration. So not only is she patient here, but she's patient in her working life. Welcome, Karina, please.
Hello, I'm Karina Vermont, and I do work for New River Community Action. I could definitely identify with, I believe it was Danny who used the term compassion deficit. And we do hear, we are some of the first line, we're the first people to hear the stories of how people get to where they are, how they become homeless. We talk to very anxious people who are in the midst of their crisis and grasping at every straw that they can. They've called 17 different places, and that's in an area this size. I work just down on the other side of Main Street. So this is, you've been here for a little while at least, this is not a very large city. This is not a New York City with, hundreds and thousands of resources for people. And that is one of the challenges of working in this area is we do have a limited number of resources. On the upside, all the resources talk to each other. We know each other. We are at the same community meetings. We shop at the same Kroger. And so we do have kind of a tight-knit group of us who try to take care of the people in our area. New River Community Action is an agency that was started back in the 60s as part of President Johnson's War on Poverty. And I believe it was Keith that was talking about how one of the key goals in their organization is that they really do keep the homeless people involved in their process. And that's a really key value of his group. One of our key values is also to keep the low-income folks represented and active in that process. Our board is always 1/3 of, there's always a representative from each area who is a low-income community member. And I think that really does keep us true to our roots. It keeps us true to involving people at the grassroots as much as we can. Those are the people that do have the first-hand experiences that have been shared up here, and we value those things and try to keep them fresh in our minds so that we're doing things that make sense. We're not just white folks from the suburbs coming and telling people how to fix their problems. We're working with the people who have experience in finding those answers for themselves. I don't really have statistics that would wow you folks. Our homeless statistics in this area seem very small. We do a count every January, and this year we had about 24 families in this area that were counted on that one day. It's just just how our town is set up to do it on one day. And that can be tricky because, like Keith indicated, a lot of our folks are those couch surfers. They're people who are staying from place to place. They're doubled up with friends and family. And we don't know about them because they would get in trouble. They would get their friends evicted from their housing and then lose their own housing if they were to be known that they were in those situations. And so it's a tricky situation. We are not able to necessarily count all of the folks that are in those situations, which leaves us unable sometimes to get the funding that we need to operate programs or to provide services that would benefit them. It is kind of this catch-22. How do we help them when we don't know that they're there? How do we find resources when we're not able to demonstrate that we have impressive numbers to our funding sources? And I would say one of our barriers in this area is something that I'm sure a lot of cities face. There's a limited availability of affordable housing even in this area. Towns and cities are unwilling to do the things that they need to do to allow there to be affordable housing. Existing neighborhoods are very hesitant to allow affordable housing to be built near them. That's universal, I think. It doesn't matter if you're in a rural area, in a small town, or if you're in New York City. People are hesitant to see those people, whatever that means to them, move in next door. And I think one of our roles as advocates for low-income people, whether they're homeless or not, is to remind the people in office, the people who are in the community, that these people are fundamentally not different. They read the same newspapers, they shop at the same stores, they send their children to the same schools, and we have more in common than we think we do. So that is just a little picture of kind of the local perspective, and I'd be happy to share more with any of you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to run just a little bit over here. If you need to go and you're very hungry, then you can go ahead and go. That dorm food is pretty good. It's a lot better than when I was in college. Got a lot more choices. We've had a panelist join us who I've not had the pleasure to meet yet, but I'd like to introduce to all of you to talk a little bit about homelessness and surviving economic depression. He is a Green Party candidate for president, and he is a Mountain Party candidate for the governor of West Virginia and an environmental activist fighting for mountaintop removal mining, fighting against mountaintop removal mining. Those of us who've been raised around any mining communities know the travesties that happen on behalf of the mining industry across this country and the devastation that's done to the land. And I'd like to welcome Jesse Johnson to come up and speak, and please welcome him. And we have one other speaker who's going to talk to us about the mortgage crisis.
Thank you. Well, she introduced me, so I don't have to say anything about myself. But what I would like to talk about is what is going on in our country. And it's nothing new. It happens as each generation tends to die off, and institutional memory sort of disappears, and a new generation is left to pick up the pieces and try to desperately remember what they were taught by their great-grandparents and their grandparents and their other relatives who had endured the very things that we're seeing take place across this country. Homelessness, first of all, from a Green Party point of view, I do want to bring up that there's an incredible thing that happened in the 2004 presidential election. The vice presidential candidate, Pat LaMarche, for the Green Party, took upon herself to go out and live amongst the homeless all across this nation. And she lived in homeless shelters far and wide sense. Homelessness is something that anytime you find empire, which is what we've become, and we're starting to suffer all the symptoms of empire, from the Romans to the Spanish to the Dutch to the English to today here in this country, all of the symptoms are always the same. And economic collapse is at the end. And along with the hubris of this militarism, we have a military-based economy in this nation, and we've got to come to terms with that, recognize it. And to that point, there are moments in our history that many of us here are old enough to recall, perhaps when Eisenhower left office and he warned us about the coming military-industrial complex. Kennedy sort of used that against him at the time, saying he's sort of out of step, he's gotten a little older. And about 6 weeks prior to the Kennedy assassination, he gave a radio address saying the same thing. And often when I address people, I'll pull out a letter and I'll read it, warning of the exact same types of crises. And then I read that it was April 14th in a letter from a fellow by the name of Abraham Lincoln to General Helms at the time. The state of homelessness, first and foremost, I think needs to be put back into the press and into the consciousness of those people who consider themselves avid patriots. Because when there's 337,000 homeless veterans living on the streets, coming back, trying to assimilate into society, and having been in a situation for the previous 4 years or more, not being able to make decisions for themselves, having their lives sustained and for them, those people are desperate on the streets, and out of them, a huge number of them end up incarcerated. So I think it's really a great place for us to shine the light on this entire travesty of justice, of patriotism, and of a human moral and social contract that we are supposed to have with not only our fellow human beings and our fellow countrymen, but certainly those who are veterans who we sport those little yellow ribbons on the back of our SUVs for. I appreciate bringing up the fact that I've been fighting against mountaintop removal mining process. That's also something where homelessness plays a great role. Whether it's historically, whenever you had mining companies oppressing their workers, treating them as if they were a pick or a shovel, paying them with company scrip, housing them in company homes, and they made their purchases in company stores and company towns. And the moment that they fought for dignity and rights, they too became homeless and had to set up along rail systems in 10 cities throughout Appalachia. And then you would have the Blackwater of the day, the Pinkertons and the Baldwin Phelps come in and use Gatling guns mounted on trains to fire into those tent camps to intimidate people and get them to go back to work. So anytime you have this sort of economic oppression and ownership by that elite class, you're going to have homelessness in rampant forms. Also today, in regards to mountaintop removal, you have the same types of homelessness, but it's a little better hidden. And it's, perhaps it's by virtue of Printer, West Virginia, which is a small town in Boone County, where they've taken the toxic sludge from mines and forced it by pressure, sludge injection into the ground, which contaminates the aquifers in the town of Princeton. Suddenly you have an entire town without water. Not only that's suitably potable, but water that you could actually bathe your children in. So all of that water has to be brought in at great expense to the taxpayers at large and all of us who are in need of clean, potable water, which is everyone on earth. But also it's a situation where the taxpayer is fitting the bill as opposed to the polluter. And that polluter is oppressing that community and really trying to force that community to be homeless. So homelessness takes the shape and face of not only an individual on the street, but it also takes on the mantle of a community, of entire communities being obliterated, being forced out of their own land by virtue of not being able to have the basic needs that all that our entire society survives on. And so the hardship, homelessness really begins with that level of hardship. Then it's exerted upon the families and then ultimately the communities. And once those mountains are removed, then the entire community is either removed, or forced to leave, leaving nothing in its wake but more Superfund cleanup sites for us all to have to deal with in the future, if ever those monies are applied to that. So I think that homelessness and the coming depression are certainly interlaced. It's nothing we haven't seen before. It's something that we are going to have to acknowledge on a much broader scale. And it's going to really be up to us to bring that knowledge to the public, because it's not going to be proffered by the media at all. You're probably, I see some cameras here, but I doubt that any of them are the local news affiliate covering the good works that are trying to be exposed here. So we're going to have to become, a small army of advocates who get out there and take to the blogosphere and take to bringing what I call the last bastion of independent press left, and that of the independent filmmakers, to get out and create, now being able to utilize Google and YouTube and bring some of these social ills to a greater consciousness. And as I said, reading the books that are out there that address these issues. But another thing that I think that's going to be a coming support in regards to homelessness is sort of a reworking and a looking at the whole communal lifestyle. I believe that as we are reaching our retirement years, and most of us had lived in a time when we were very young, and communes and people gathering together was perhaps for some different reasons, some of the same reasons, but now you have elderly who are being sort of boxed in these retirement homes and communities. I venture to say that we're going to see a more communal and a more livable and common communal form of housing start sprouting up So that's, I'm going to cut this short because I didn't get to hear what else was talked about, unfortunately, and I don't want to run over any statistics or anything that other people have covered. But in facing the hard times that are coming, and they are coming, even though you're not consistently being informed, we are going by the way of all empire. And as long as we sustain this military economy, and as long as we sustain, occupations and oppressive occupations in other countries, and overstepping our boundaries, we're going to see more and more homelessness and more depression. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to wrap this panel up pretty quickly. We're going to open up for questions, though, too, briefly, for those who want to stay and ask questions. I had another woman who wanted to speak briefly and show a couple of clips of video on Tent City and on the mortgage crisis. If you'd like to find her, please look her up. Ellen Hudson Brown was here, and she wrote a book called The Web of Debt, and she has some interesting things to say if you'd like to look her up. I'm gonna say a few brief words and then open it up to you if you have questions of any of these folks. One of the things I think is changing, and I hear the empire discussion and then the collapse is coming and all those things. One of the things that gives me great hope, it gives me consternation and hope at the same time, is that there are more and more people like myself who did not come from oppressed backgrounds, who, once we have been oppressed economically and we have hurt, we don't shut up. Because we weren't taught to shut up when we were raised. And we're speaking up in louder and louder numbers. And when I testified in front of the House Judiciary last July, I assured Congressman Conyers and the others on the Judiciary Committee that others like me are coming out of the shadows and speaking up and making noise and saying it's not all right, and I do vote, and so do the other people who I know vote. That is a change in America, that as deep and deeper the crisis goes into the middle class, into the true middle class. Those are the people who go push the buttons of the ballot box. Those are the people who pay taxes and who do speak up and make a difference still in this environment. So that may be a little Pollyanna-ish, but I'm still on that ticket. The other thing I want to share with you in that Birmingham Thanksgiving that I spent with the homeless, we showed Sicko all day long that day, which was kind of a surreal experience for me, having myself on a screen in a Birmingham homeless shelter. But one of the things we talked about afterwards is the congressman in that area was holding a town hall meeting long after we activists were leaving the community, and we encouraged the homeless folks, if you can get there, you should go tell him what you think. You are entitled to tell your congressman what you think. And we heard about a week later that congressman had 20 homeless people who went together, went to that town hall meeting. They were the largest contingent at the town hall meeting, and said they wanted two things. They wanted health care and they wanted housing. And that was one of the proudest moments of this entire Sicko experience for me, that those 20 people did that. So I have hope in this. I have hope and faith in my fellow human beings still, in spite of it all. So thank you all very much. We've got some great panelists here. If you have questions for them, we have a mic here if you want to do it that way, or you can come up and chat with them. Does anybody have questions for any of these? Yes, sir.
Well, it's just a really brief statement and a question at the end. Just take a second. Our system, our empire has killed millions abroad. Why would we think the suffering of our own would move us? I think it's interesting the contrast in numbers in this session between the one and empire. I think that government workers and successful intelligentsia must be careful in their criticism of empire and economics, in so much that they might not fully comprehend everyone's extravagant expectations and the true nature of exploitative capitalism. The homeless, which I will soon join the ranks of, deserve land, but it must be clear, land to use, not land to own. Only putting an end to usury and making money without without providing goods and services, will homelessness, poverty, as well as war ever end? And speaking of poverty, $2 a day likes to be thrown around. $2 a day might not be that bad if we also had adequate housing, excellent food, and other assorted basic resources. Personally, some sort of cooperative living is the only way I can believe it will be achieved. I think a peaceful and just society would look vastly different than what we see right now, and yet it seems we want that different society without anything really changing. And finally, for instance, just take several average older leftists, baby boomers. They have enough capital to free up several hundred acres for themselves and a few other homeless and a few hundred homeless. Why doesn't this happen?
Thank you very much. Do we have panelists who'd like to answer some of his concerns?
Well, he answered his own question. When you say why we didn't want to change the system. That's right.
Well, yeah.
And only when we decide to change the system that we live under will it happen. And so
Right.
they're not there yet in terms of changing.
Right, but we don't hear it talked about too much. I mean, usury, and I mean, this conference, the organization that's behind this conference, Prout, I mean, I've studied it, and I'm very encouraged to see I'm not the only one thinking this. I mean, exploitive capitalism, it's very clear, and Prout acknowledges that. You cannot own what you don't use. You cannot make money. But all government workers, we can't have one class of people living off the whole bottom class. I mean, government workers criticizing the system, but the very system, I mean, then we have all these people out there in the system trying to make money exploiting each other, forgetting about the rest of the world. That's how it works. Making money off the sale of land is stealing, and we don't acknowledge that. I guess that's what I'm saying. But the final question is, why doesn't the leftist baby boomers who've been working for the government and have got several $100,000, why don't they get together, buy the land so that we can live in these communes? Why not? Because we are all part of it. That's part of the problem. And
We're not there yet.
that's right. Yeah, we're doing it. But that's why we're here at this conference, I would assume, is to talk about it.
Right. You did it very well.
Yeah, I mean, it is happening, of course, on a massive scale across the country. So, I mean, people are taking back land, or that's where all the homeless people living. They're living all over the country.
Right, but
and so they're like, but it's why wealthy people aren't like buying land to share with poor people. I mean,
but it's not
that's like
the interesting question is,
they'll be like homeless and they can join everybody and live in
right. Not the interesting question to me is not the wealthy, but the leftists, the radical leftists, progressive liberals who have got the money. Why don't they buy the land and free it up?
Well, why don't they just contribute like $4 if we don't bonds?
Well, you see, that's the thing. Why do we want to give a handout to the homeless? The homeless don't want a handout. They want to take care of themselves. They want to grow food for themselves. A few bucks and a little bit of food, what's that?
I think you are going to be highly successful if you can answer all of those questions.
Well,
and I'm not trying to be cute about that. I'm saying we do have an awful lot of people on the left who are extraordinarily wealthy, who have a lot of resources, who could do an awful lot of good in many ways, personally, publicly, who choose not to. They espouse many, many values that they should be backing with their money, and they're not doing that. And they're not sharing their wealth, and they're not sharing their resources. I mean, it's kind of an unpopular thing I've talked about a little bit this week. We all feel saddened about Senator Ted Kennedy and the diagnosis of a brain tumor. That's a very sad diagnosis for anyone. But one of the things that I've pointed out all week this week is because of his family's massive wealth, and because he's a senator in the United States Senate, the first thought in his mind will never have to be, can I go get treatment? Ever. I'll tell you what, when I got a cancer diagnosis, my first thought was either let me die fast so I don't bankrupt my husband, or let the insurance company not hold back treatment. That's a travesty too, that I don't know how to answer that either. Why in the world would all the Ted Kennedys in this country who have massive wealth not immediately understand that and say, I'd like to fund cancer treatment for 50 other Americans? It's a big question. It's a huge question, because he's clearly, they call him the lion of the left. Good question.
Yeah, I just had a friend die of brain cancer on the streets of Miami. She had no treatment, and her head just got huge, and then she blew up and died on the streets. This happens a lot.
So yeah, we can have one more question and then we'll
Respond to that.
go ahead.
Well, I think there's actually two questions. It's important to keep them separate because they're not the same answer. So the two questions are, you're asking why individuals or groups of individuals not do certain things. And those answers are different than the point that this gentleman made about that there's a systemic problem. And systemically, why it doesn't change is because there are people who benefit from things the way they are, and they're fighting to keep it the way it is. So that's a completely different answer than asking why individuals don't choose to take righteous action. And that's something that's going to be with us forever, because individuals are going to do what they do. And my experience is that more and more individuals are making those choices. I know a number of people who inherited great wealth and gave it all away to just causes. And that's increasing. There's even books about it. So my experience is that it actually is happening in greater numbers. It's just that the problem is so huge, and the media isn't covering that. It feels like nothing's happening and isn't going that way. So individuals are stepping up to the plate in greater numbers. The system isn't changing fast enough.
Yes, and also I'd like to say that I think that a more significant first step amongst those wealthy people who espouse their beliefs of being progressives and on the left would be taking the media back. I mean, having your Streisand's and your Spielbergs and the different people who are supposed to be standing up for those values, where are they as far as taking back a segment of the media? And they have the wealth to take back the media. We have 6 companies, multinational corporations, that manufacture everything that you intellectually digest in this nation, or in the world at large, but particularly in this nation. 6 companies, and they manufacture all the books, the magazines, the television, the radio, etc. And there is why you don't have, a larger awareness within the public. And while there's not an outcry among people of faith, people of conscience, so I think that's one of the first steps that I would press, coming from your point of view.
But I would say this is a meeting about homelessness. We're not talking about media. We're talking about a place to live. We're talking about health and food and growing food. We don't need to talk. We need a place, right?
But there's not an overall awareness in this country of the need
But I'm talking about the people at this conference. I'm not talking about the country. And there's out of every 10 people here, I guarantee you there's $1 million in capital that could be put into land. Every 10 people here have it. Why is it being done?
They do. I came to a more wealthy conference than I thought. I suspect it might not be quite that rich, but...
Well, I bet if with the seeds, like that Stephen Hawking said, or whoever it was, it's like people love, be glad to tell you their sexual proclivities, but they're very adverse to opening their bank account and showing you their resources, I mean, there's a lot of government workers here, and they're older. They've got the capital. And
I think you should keep asking the question in every one of the sessions you go
I
to.
think that's a lot of what life is, asking the question.
I'll share my $100 with you. That's what I have left. I mean, that's what I have left.